And we do have the Labor Commissioner, Leslie Osborne, coming next week, and Lieutenant Governor Matt Pinnell coming August 1st. So you might want to write those dates down as well. Cindy Byrd is a CPA. She's Oklahoma's 13th state auditor and inspector, the first woman. Congratulations. I appreciate that. Elected to office. Byrd has worked for the state auditor's office for 27 years, has served as deputy state auditor, the director of the county audit division. Cindy published close to 2,000 audits, some of which have garnered statewide and national attention. State Auditor Byrd serves as vice chairman on the Oklahoma State Pension Commission, member of the State Board of Equalization, chairman of the State Board of Equalization Subcommittee, and commissioner of the Commissioners of the Land Office. Cindy is an outstanding state auditor. She is married to her husband, Steve, and they live in Colgate, Oklahoma. I do know that. I'll add a little of that. She is an outstanding state auditor. I believe she's done a wonderful job of representing us as taxpayers and citizens. I hate that is a termed out position. I'd love to see you have that forever. But I'm sure she has aspirations of other things. I certainly hope you do. And I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Byrd, our Oklahoma State Auditor and Inspector.
Well, thank you, Glenna and Kevin, and the Stillwater Rotary for your kind invitation. It's an honor to be here with all of you today. I also want to say thank you to Representative Ranson for being here today. I don't get to see her that often, but I appreciate her hard work. A Rotarian's pledge to uphold the truth is something I value greatly, and it seems to be a forgotten pillar of our society. As your state auditor, it's not always easy to shine the light of truth. Things that were meant to stay in the shadows get exposed. But I will tell you this, liars figure, but figures never lie. I'm a fourth-generation Oklahoman. I grew up in Colgate, a town of less than 2,000 people down in southeastern Oklahoma, and I still live there today with my husband, Steve, and my entire family. I'm proud to say that I am rural. I think it's the rural in me that's helped me to stand strong and not back down to the crazy that can happen at our state capitol. Now, in college, I thought I was going to be an attorney, but my grandmother could not stand the thought of that. And she recognized my love for numbers and put me on the path to becoming an accountant. The state auditor's office was my first job out of college, and now this is my 27th year to be a government auditor. I'm a licensed CPA, first woman, as Glenna mentioned, to be elected to this statewide office, and the first person to be leading this office in over 30 years who has performed audits and done so across the state. Now, before we get started, I want to make sure everyone can see the PowerPoint up here, and let me know if you need me to speak up. I encourage you to look at the TV. You don't want to look at me. So, now these are the divisions of the state auditor's office and the statutes that give us the authority to conduct audits at both the state and county level. The state auditor's office conducts an average of 350 audits each year, and this work is done by these 5 divisions and approximately 100 state auditors. And each of these divisions perform a different type of audit. Now, I would like to give a shout out to all those who work in county government. Thank you for all the work you do to keep local government the best form of government for the people. And let me tell you a story about County Clerk Glenna Craig. Well, this is a good story, and you've probably heard a little bit about it. In 2021, recently after the new sheriff took office, Glenna noticed a suspicious invoice and alerted the Board of County Commissioners, who immediately requested us to do an investigative audit. What we found was the sheriff's administrative assistant handled all of the office's finances, and she was able to take thousands of dollars for her personal use, home makeovers, and hotel stays. How did she do this? And welcome mats. How did she do this? Well, she had the sheriff's signature stamp. She stamped his name to start the purchase. All the invoices were sent to her, and then she verified the purchase was received. Well, let's just say that the assistant got pretty good at altering invoices and making it look like the sheriff had authorized the purchase. Between 2010 and 2022, she accumulated $137,698 in misappropriated and questioned expenditures. Her behavior went undetected by 3 sheriff's administrations. With 3 different sheriff's stamps to forge signatures on purchase orders and payroll, she even approved her own overtime and holiday pay. Now, even if just one sheriff took a moment to review the transactions and sign his own name, this situation and many more like them can be avoided. So that was a great catch, Glenna. Good job. So I'm sure that some of you may have seen the news in April where I went nuclear on the concept that Oklahoma is becoming a no-bid state. When I'm asked, how are things going? My response, I'm drowning in the bad behaviors of the past. An audit comes in after the fact. So in 2024, we are seeing how the state's decision-making of 2020 through 2022 is affecting us today. Today, I'm going to brief you on the fiscal year 2022 single audit findings. It's a lot of information. It's a bit heavy and overwhelming, but it's important because just like in different aspects of your life, you look to secure the best quality goods and services for the best price. And so should our state government. So what is the single audit? The single audit's required by the federal government to ensure that the state of Oklahoma spent the federal grant money they received according to federal requirements. The auditing of pandemic relief funds has roughly doubled the workload of my auditors. And it's the state's handling of COVID dollars where we found a majority of the problems. Now, it is important to know that any federal dollars not spent in compliance with grant guidelines are called questioned cost, and the U.S. Treasury can demand the repayment of questioned cost. The findings in the fiscal year 22 single audit of federal funds are symptoms of a much greater problem happening at OMES. OMES is the Office of Management and Enterprise Services. It was created in 2012 to oversee the distribution of the $30 billion that runs through our state's government each year. The single audit revealed that COVID allowed for a new set of rules at OMES, which are not good for the taxpayer in the way that our state is choosing to enter into contracts with vendors and the state's lack of oversight for federal grants. Now, when I say state, I'm referring to the state agency tasked with these responsibilities, which is OMES. Today, I'll be illustrating these concerns with examples from an IT vendor contract and a consulting contract. Now, this one consulting contract contributed to $4.6 million in questioned cost for the federal CARES dollars, $250,000 in questioned cost for the GEAR funds, and over $21 million in questioned cost for the federal ERA grant. Now, ultimately, the single audit findings are a result of OMES's neglect to properly conduct an RFP and competitive bidding process according to state law. Let's begin with how OMES handled this consulting firm's contract. The consultant was a former employee at OMES and was a trusted resource for members of the legislature to help with their budget and policy needs. She worked in the state budget office for 15 years alongside the current budget director. In June of 2019, she left state government and started her own consulting company, which I will refer to as JGC. In March 2020, COVID-19 hit Oklahoma. Now, do you remember where you were when we were all sent to quarantine? I was at a Thunder game waiting for it to start when the teams just suddenly left the court. And we were left waiting until the announcement was made that COVID was here. Well, in response to COVID, the federal government sent CARES dollars to the state to help with the virus-related cost. Governor Stitt established the CARES Forward team. made up of his cabinet secretaries and public employees to oversee the spending of the federal COVID dollars at both the state and local levels. The CARES team called on JGC for help and gave her the team's role of project director. In that role, JGC was part of the decision-making of who received Oklahoma's $1.2 billion in the CARES COVID relief funds. A month later, May 1st of 2020, OMES awarded JGC a contract to administer and oversee the CARES funds. Now, concerning JGC's contract, these are the statutes and codes in question. JGC's budget and policy background does not indicate knowledge of federal grant administration. Federal grant oversight is in a specialized area of government accounting. It's unlike any other financial responsibility. JGC's degree is in communication, and her newly found consulting firm did not appear to have experience in administering and overseeing federal grants. Now, in order to administer federal funds, the Federal Code of Regulation is clear that state bidding laws are to be followed before a contract is awarded. JGC's contract was not competitively bid. Concerning payment, typically consulting contracts utilize an hourly rate for defined deliverables. Well, JGC's contract allowed for lump sums billed in equal monthly installments. Facilitating the award of the contract was the budget director, who had a 15-year working relationship with JGC. And the budget director independently monitored and oversaw JGC's work and signed off on her payments. Was this contract a conflict of interest? Well, JGC's contract was for $325,000, and this amount conflicted with the governor's executive order at the time that stated even during a pandemic, any contract over $250,000 was to be bid. Every month, equal monthly payments were submitted for 2 to 4 full-time employees without the number of hours worked or proof of what work was actually performed. The OMES budget director signed off on these payments. And for fiscal year 22, out of the $719,500 paid to JGC for CARES work, we questioned $469,000 because of the uncertainty of what work was performed for the invoices that were submitted. Now, concerning the quality of the work performed, OMES and JGC were responsible to review claims to ensure allowability of the CARES expenditures. Well, JGC approved awards that did not meet the grant criteria, and it resulted in these fiscal year 20 through 22 question cost. These same problems were also found at the county level. $250 million in CARES funds were set aside for cities and counties. And in fiscal year 22, my office reported $3.2 million in question cost for the county government's use of the CARES funds. The question cost? Well, they were the claims approved by JGC as allowable expenditures. The claims were apparently not properly reviewed. Understandably, county officials were not happy with these findings, pointing to the state's, OMES's role and responsibility to review and approve their claims before reimbursing them. Now, just like the state, if the federal government makes the demand, counties could be forced to pay back these funds, even if it is OMES's fault. We saw even more payments made to JGC without proof of work on another federal grant. Now, GEAR stands for the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. GEAR dollars were dedicated to meet students' needs, their education needs during COVID. But due to a lack of oversight, education dollars were used to purchase TVs, cell phones, power washers, doorbells, even Christmas decorations. In 2022, the feds investigated and required Oklahoma to return $650,000 just as a start. November of 2020, the OMES budget director added an addendum to JGC's already existing CARES contract. Something about a governor's economic relief fund. Now, we typically don't see dots for abbreviation used in a contract scope of work. Apparently, governor's economic ... relief fund is GEAR. According to this CARES contract addendum, JGC was hired to do the federal reporting for the GEAR grant. We also discovered that a year later, without a corresponding contract, payments were being made to JGC for GEAR 1 subrecipient monitoring. Now, the problem is the monitoring payment dates reveal that no GEAR grant monitoring occurred during the time frame of when the GEAR program was in question. October, November, and December of 2021, OMES paid JGC $49,500 for GEAR 1 subrecipient monitoring services. Now, we are unsure what work was performed by JGC for these hours submitted because JGC had not requested any data, any records, or information to even monitor the GEAR program. The state paid 2 other firms to perform monitoring work for GEAR 1. So we questioned these GEAR 1 payments to JGC. October of 21, OMES arranged for JGC to be hired for GEAR 2 federal grant management services for $330,000. The green highlight represents when my office met with the OMES Grants Management Director to inform him that JGC did not have any records to monitor the GEAR programs. Well, after that visit in August of 2022, JGC received her last payment for the GEAR 2 contract, 2 months prior to the contract being fully paid. Now, for all these payments, it appears that OMES never requested a work product from JGC. And we know this because no GEAR 2 funds had been expended at the time of these payments. It wasn't until September of 2023, over a year later, that any GEAR 2 programs were selected and the funds were expended. That means that none of these monthly payments to JGC could have been for GEAR 2 monitoring. We questioned a total of $249,333 that OMES paid JGC for 2 full-time employees for services not provided for the GEAR 1 and GEAR 2 programs. Now, also, OMES contracted and paid JGC for GEAR reporting. We questioned her reports for expenditures not matching the documentation provided, for inaccuracies, and for being over a year late for submission. The AG, the Attorney General, has requested an investigative audit on the GEAR funds that we are currently working on. Oklahoma paid JGC $1.1 million for CARES and GEAR program administration, oversight, and reporting with a no-bid contract. This amount does not include payments from a nonprofit who hired JGC's firm directly to oversee the ERA grant dollars. CFO, that's Community Foundations of Oklahoma, a nonprofit organization, hired JGC to help deploy their federal emergency rental assistance program funds. Now, the ERA grant was the largest question cost of fiscal year 2022. First, let's review how the ERA grant dollars were distributed and the purpose of the ERA grant. The feds awarded $276 million federal emergency rental assistance, that's the ERA funds, to the state. To help administer these funds, OMES contracted with 2 nonprofits, Community Foundations of Oklahoma in Oklahoma City, who received the bulk of the funding, and Restore Hope Ministries, RHM, in Tulsa. Now, when my office audits the ERA grant, we look at OMES. Did OMES ensure that the nonprofits that they contracted with followed federal laws, rules, and policies so that every grant dollar reached its intended purpose? So who was eligible to receive ERA grant funds for rent and utility assistance? Well, according to U.S. Treasury requirements, the monies for Oklahomans who have experienced a financial hardship due to COVID, obligated to pay rent on an existing residence, at risk of housing instability, and their low income. The nonprofit CFO took the U.S. Treasury guidelines and wrote their in-house policy and procedures to check for ERA grant eligibility. CFO emphasized the applicant must be impacted by COVID-19, live in Oklahoma, and currently be paying rent on a residence in Oklahoma. Now, this is a screenshot of CFO's application, reiterating these eligibility requirements. At the bottom of the applicant review, you can see the reasons for denial. The applicant doesn't live in Oklahoma, or the applicant is not impacted by COVID-19. So keeping this in mind, in our audit sample, we saw one line item for one grant applicant for $4.3 million. So clearly we requested more information. The one line item was for hotel payments, not for one applicant, but for 498 different applicants. And strangely, these individuals did not live in Oklahoma, did not have a current residence paying rent, were not impacted by COVID-19. In fact, they didn't even fill out an application for assistance. For these reasons, the State Auditor's Office questioned the full $4.3 million. So who were these individuals? In 2022, the state, OMES, gave CFO, the nonprofit, $207 million earmarked for Oklahomans' rent and utilities. CFO chose to give $4.3 million for hotel payments, $382,000 for moving expenses from the hotel to apartments, $1.8 million to Catholic Charities, $750,000 to the Spiro Project, $25,000 to the Afghan Legal Network. So what do these payments mean? Catholic Charities contracted with CFO to relocate Afghan refugees after being displaced from their country. They were placed in hotels for temporary housing until apartments were found. Now, because the ERA grant dollars were used for this special interest, the State Auditor's Office questioned $6.5 million. When this carve-out exception was made, over 1,700 eligible Oklahomans were unable to receive rent, utility, and housing stability services. Now, OMES allowed CFO to do this when DHS already received federal grant dollars dedicated to assist refugees. There was money specifically earmarked and available here to assist the Afghans. Typical federal grant administrative expenses include payroll, software and IT, rent and utilities, possibly some legal fees. Out of the $7.3 million administrative dollars that CFO spent, we questioned CFO's payroll bonuses, a second and separate JGC contract paying her at a much higher rate, their credit card expenditures, and CFO's management fee. So why the CFO's credit card expenditures? While testing credit card administrative expenditures totaling $115,995 for CFO, we noted the following: over $18,000 on food and entertainment, $12,000 on gift cards, $1,000 on flowers, $10,000 on personal incentives and other. Now, CFO was serving as an extension of the state, and in that role, their admin expenses should be kept to a minimum, and every grant dollar recognized and remembered that it is an individual's tax dollar, not used for unallowable expenses like one-time experiences at Topgolf, Chicken and Pickle, an escape room or immersive art, a macaroon cooking class, planting succulents, painting while enjoying a bottle of wine, or enjoying an expensive steak dinner at Broadway 10. COVID dollars meant for admin were being used to have a time on the town. Now, these food charges represent multiple purchases and or visits. Now, state employees cannot use the state's P card on snacks or lunches at the local restaurants and bars. If the expenditures were unallowable for state employees, then it's also unallowable for the grant recipients. CFO's administration chose to give gift cards to their contractors as rewards for their work on the ERA grant. The gift cards given range from $15 to $50 apiece at these locations. Now, gift cards might seem like a nice gesture for the purpose of grant administration. However, grant guidelines deem that these gift card purchases as an unallowable expense, just like purchasing trendy Oklahoma pint glasses, Oklahoma hydro cloths, which are just fancy paper towels, or sending individually wrapped cookies, fresh flowers, and even movers for an employee's personal moving expenses within the city. Even if the intentions were meant as kindness in the midst of the pandemic, these are not appropriate uses of ERA grant dollars meant for Oklahomans' neediest rent and utility payments. Unallowable administrative expenditures reveals that OMES, the state, did not provide proper oversight. But the most troubling example of OMES, or the state's lack of oversight, is concerning CFO's management fee. In fiscal year 22, CFO received $24 million for administrative needs. And from this, they only expended $7 million, leaving CFO with more than $15 million. So why was there so much excess? Instead of reimbursing the actual administrative cost incurred or needed, OMES just advanced lump sum payments to CFO. This allowed CFO to stockpile money, and then they deemed it as their management fee. Now, CFO's off-the-top management fee fund grew steadily. Last year, we reported $1.5 million in excessive management fees, and we alerted OMES. However, OMES failed to stop the overcharge. CFO also took a management fee from their county and city contracts. Now, federal guidelines are clear. The administration fee is only for charges that are directly attributable to the operations of the grant. It's not for the nonprofit to make a profit. Otherwise, everyone would set up a fee fund, take portions from federal grants to hold over, instead of dispersing the funds to the people in need. Now, as of June 30th of 2022, the management fee balance was $8.6 million, and the amount questioned in the 22 single audit findings. Now, CFO's management fee could have serviced 2,542 eligible Oklahomans with rent, utility, or housing stabilization services. Today, CFO's management fee could be as much as $15 million or more. Restore Hope Ministries, RHM, in Tulsa, that's the Tulsa nonprofit tasked to administer the ERA grant, they did not take a management fee. Instead of OMES demanding the return of the management fee to the state, they did the following. CFO's contract with JGC's firm also included liaising with the state of Oklahoma for ERA federal grant reporting and compliance. Now, keeping that in mind, as of June 30th, 2022, CFO had $10 million in the unallowable management fee and an additional $15 million in advanced administrative funds by OMES. That $25 million is in holding, drawing interest probably. JGC was hired and paid directly by CFO for all ERA federal grant compliance reporting. JGC sent the required reports to the budget director at OMES, who appears to have rubber stamped the reports and then submitted them on to the U.S. Treasury. The reports show that all of the funds advanced to CFO were expended. Now, this presents an appearance of compliance to the feds because the feds see the ERA grant as closed out and the money spent. Both an outside CPA firm and the State Auditor's Office questioned CFO for holding part of these funds back as a management fee. But the OMES budget director sent the following email to CFO. The email said that CFO could just keep the management fee in accordance with federal guidelines. Now, keeping the management fee is in contradiction to the Code of Federal Regulations. Federal code's clear. The nonprofit may not earn or keep any profits resulting from the federal financial assistance. And concerning the claim that CFO was just a contractor, CFO signed 2 contracts with the state of Oklahoma as subrecipients to administer the ERA grant dollars. For the fiscal year 22 single audit, the total ERA question cost is $21 million. And if we would have tested 100%, the projected amount could be around $60 million. The federal government will now be responsible to review these findings and make the determination if the state will need to pay these funds back. Over 5,000 eligible Oklahomans were denied rent, utility, and housing stability needs because OMES did not monitor this ERA grant. Now, my office approached OMES with concerns about JGC's involvement with the CARES, the GEAR, and ERA grant mismanagement. OMES's response? Highlighting Title 62 in her contract. Title 62 says, the OMES director, on behalf of the state, can choose to make acquisitions without competitively bidding the contract when he feels it's in the best interest of the state. So instead of taking caution, on June 10th of 2022, OMES awarded JGC a statewide contract for consulting. And November 23rd, 2023, OMES awarded JGC a statewide contract for IT services consulting. So what does statewide contract mean? Well, by law, it's supposed to mean that OMES fully vetted the vendor or contractor's experience and concluded that it is the best quality and best price for goods and services. Now, all state and county governments are directed by OMES to contract with vendors from the statewide contract. State and county governments are permitted to hire from statewide contracts without doing a bid because it's the duty of the state's central purchasing at OMES to ensure only the very best are on this list. This is important to keep in mind for the remainder of this presentation. JGC's statewide contract status has garnered her with $4.9 million worth of contracts with the state. This does not include counties, cities, and nonprofits. OMES placed another vendor on statewide contract mentioned in the single audit that I would also like to mention as we're closing. In 2020, CARES Forward earmarked $17 million in federal funds for OMES to help the Oklahoma Employment Security Commission, that's OESC, make needed improvements to their outdated mainframe. Due to the pandemic, OESC had a backlog of around 60,000 claims and over 15,000 of possible fraud claims. In April of 2020, OMES contracted with P2, a software consultant company, to stabilize and update the mainframe. OMES's Chief Information Officer approved a no-bid contract with P2 for product consultation for $75,000. However, by change order number 4, P2's no-bid contract was now at $857,000. And by August of 2020, the OMES contract with P2 was now at $6.1 million, for a total of over $7 million. Shelley Zumwalt became OESC Executive Director in May of 2020. Now, this is the same time OMES took over OESC's business and IT services. OMES had OESC contract directly with Phase 2. Zumwalt first approved a contract with Phase 2 for $40,000. By April of 2022, $8.5 million was paid to P2 by OESC, signed by Executive Director Zumwalt. John Zumwalt is Vice President of Phase 2. He's the husband of the OESC Executive Director at the time, Shelley Zumwalt. Federal law requires that any entity receiving federal dollars must disclose any conflict of interest in writing. Code of Federal Regulation 200.318 states that any person that could possibly financially benefit from the federal dollars cannot be part of the selection, award, administration, or contracting of those dollars. Now, OESC had 2 ways for employees to report any type of related party transactions. A notarized internal related party affidavit form that was required by policy, and the OMES required GAAP package. Now, the GAP form asks, did your agency perform business with any non-state entities that could meet the definition of related party transactions? And the response by Zumwalt checked no. No related party disclosures were identified for Zumwalt for the 21 or 2022 OMES GAP forms. The OESC internal form asks if the respondent, their spouse, or dependents were involved in any related party transactions with OESC. The executive director did not disclose that her husband was vice president of P2 on the 2020 internal related party form signed and notarized on April 8th of 2021. When we asked for 2021 and 2022 related party forms, the OESC legal counsel stated that employees were no longer required to complete that form. October of 2022, the governor appointed Zumwalt as executive director of tourism. In the fall of 2022, Senator Murdoch's bill reinstating that a director of an agency must file a financial disclosure statement was enacted. May of 2023, only after she was moved to tourism, Zumwalt complied and listed Phase 2, identifying it as a software firm. Now, OMES placed P2 on statewide contract for state and local governments to hire without a bid. 21 million taxpayer dollars have been paid to this vendor when there is no RFP or bid process. If that's the case, how can the state answer if we paid or if we overpaid or if the vendor underperformed? P2 received millions in federal funds. So the state auditor's office inquired why P2's contract was not competitively bid. The response from OMES is a memo explaining OMES shall have the power to authorize acquisitions without competitive bids whenever the director determines it's in the best interest of the state. Now, for the single audit, the state auditor's office is required to ask if vendors approved by OMES that received federal funds were competitively bid. This is when we became aware that there are two pathways for a vendor or contractor to be placed on statewide contract. One pathway is outlined in statute. One pathway is a pilot program created by OMES back in 2019 called a rolling RFP. It's the speedway to getting on the statewide contract. OMES directors, the chief information officer, and the purchasing director can place any vendor of their choice on the statewide contract without a bid. Then OMES leadership chooses vendors of their choice and directs state agencies to use those specific vendors. Meanwhile, state agencies and the general public believe the vendors doing business with the state are fully vetted, following Title 74 and 61, which requires utilizing a competitive bid. Now, federal regulations require that any contract paid with federal funds to be competitively bid according to the state's law. Well, our law is Title 74, Title 61, but OMES's practice is this rolling RFP. When my office requested justification that outlines OMES's decision-making for the vendors chosen on the statewide contract without a competitive bid, there's no explanation given because there are no written policies and procedures for following the rolling RFP. For OMES to circumvent the safeguards in the law and choose whomever OMES wants should make businesses question if they have a fair chance to do business with the state with OMES's current practices. It should cause the legislature to demand that OMES present this experimental program to committee for approval to continue as the statute dictates. And it should make taxpayers demand answers for why unelected bureaucrats have carte blanche with our tax dollars. To my knowledge, this experiment has been going on for 4 years, indefinitely suspending competitive bidding in our state. Through the rolling RFP, OMES has created their own revenue stream. For every vendor that OMES adds to the statewide contract, they can negotiate a management fee. Year after year, statewide contract revenue continues to grow by the millions. It was $9 million last year. This management fee has never been audited. This revenue incentive has created a culture of outsourcing the needs of an agency to statewide contracted vendors. Now, the state fiscal year 22 single audit reveals that Oklahoma is becoming a no-bid state. Competitive bidding, which was once the standard procedure so that the taxpayer got the best service for the best price, it's becoming a thing of the past. OMES has carved out competitive bidding and allowed for many exemptions with no justification required. This behavior has enriched the politically connected and led to the abuse of taxpayer dollars. OMES is to be the agency that ensures state government is in compliance with the Central Purchasing Act outlined in Oklahoma statutes. According to OMES's own website, the agency is to make public expenditures with the highest degree of public trust and impeccable standards of conduct. The way OMES has managed federal funds is a liability to our state. Since 2020 until today, my auditors have met with OMES to share concerns, and OMES leadership has had little regard for our recommendations. The abuses in the state fiscal year 2022 single audit of federal funds all point to the OMES Central Purchasing Office. And the results of OMES's actions are also seen in our current investigative audit list, like the investigative audit of tourism involving Swadley's Barbecue. Now, the Attorney General has requested an investigative audit. Okay. With the release of the state fiscal year 22 single audit, as well as all of the investigative audits my office has in queue, well, the information shakes things up. It can bring opposition. It's always the intent of the state auditor's office for the information presented to work out for the good so that necessary changes will be made, solid financial practices restored, so our state can continue to thrive. And I want you to remember, as your state auditor, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution and safeguard our taxpayer dollars. For every statement that I sign off on, I have a work paper to back it up. When government functions as it was designed, it's a service to the people and not a burden on their checkbook. I've been asked if the auditor ever has good news. Well, though that really isn't the nature of my job, I can assure you that there's a lot more going right than going wrong. A majority of our state and county government is transparent and responsible with our taxpayer dollars in order to best service Oklahomans. And we will get this fixed. It's an honor to serve as your state auditor. Thank you.